Guess what? Numbnuts is here. Oh. Here for his TV program. My goodness. He's got his TV tie-in.
Are there any other votes? Announce the results.
Ayes 107, noes 6.
The bill is passed.
Assembly 1114, calendar number 49, Mr. Dinowitz, an act to amend the general business law.
Read the last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
Clerk will record the vote. Are there any other votes? Announce the results.
Ayes 104, noes 7.
The bill is passed.
Assembly 3160A, Calendar 143, Mr. Crouch, an act in relation to granting Luke Parga Tier 4 status in the New York State and Local Employees Retirement System with a membership date of 2006.
Read the last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
Clerk will record the vote. Are there any other votes? Announce the results.
Ayes 106, noes 2.
The bill is passed.
Assembly 7320, Calendar 281, Ms. Weinstein, an act to amend the civil practice law and rules.
Read the last section.
This act shall take effect immediately.
Clerk will record the vote. Are there any other votes? Announce the results.
Ayes 107, noes 7.
The bill is passed. Mr. Morelli.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. If we could have a little order in the chamber.
Members, members, staff.
Thank you, sir. If we could now go to page 17 of the main calendar and take up calendar number 183 by Mr. Godfrey.
Clerk will read.
Assembly 4558B, Calendar 183. Mr. Gottfried, an act to amend the executive law.
An explanation is requested, Mr. Godfrey. We are on debate. So, we've got a lot of conversations around the perimeter, Mr.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, this is the bill known as GENDA, which would extend New York's various human rights legislation to apply to discrimination based on gender identity or expression.
Mr. Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the sponsor yield?
Yes.
Mr. Godfrey yields, Mr. Murray.
Thank you. Mr. Gottfried, this bill, now, would this bill say that gender identity, would this be an accurate statement that this bill says that gender identity is now decided not by anatomy or biology, but by how someone feels or identifies? Would that be an accurate analogy?
Well, it would not be determined by anatomy. I would say feels probably trivializes a transgender person, but you're certainly in the ballpark. It would be determined by, the bill has a series of words explaining what gender identity and expression are. And yes, that would be what would count for purposes of this legislation, not actual anatomy or the gender assigned at birth.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gottfried. On the bill, Mr. Speaker?
On the bill, Mr. Murray.
So, now I can certainly appreciate the complexity of this situation. My concerns are in regards to this bill's impact on others, by others, and again, in no way, shape, or form do I want to in any way trivialize this. But I'll give an example. For example, a man standing on a street corner yelling out obscenities at the top of his lungs. That's illegal. It's not illegal because we feel that he may get a sore throat or it's damaging in any way to himself. It's illegal because it affects others. So it would be disorderly conduct. We frown on that. It's impacting others in a negative way. In some cases, if these are obscenities, it could be in front of children. So it has an impact on others. Well, this bill has a very big impact on others. There's a gym throughout the nation, a very popular gym called Curves. It's a gym for women. The mission statement of Curves is committed to providing women with the tools necessary to empower themselves to live more fulfilling lives. Their company overview says Curves International, Inc. is one of the largest chains of fitness centers for women in the world. This is a women's-only facility. So we reached out, and we called a couple of these locations, and we asked them, could men join this gym? And the answer was absolutely not. And it wasn't just one location, it was several locations. They said absolutely not. Well, why? Well, because they want this to be considered a safe, non-intimidating, comfortable environment for women to go and work out. But I wonder how comfortable and safe they will feel when a man can come in, an anatomical man, a biological man, can come in and go into their locker rooms with them. Now, I wanted to bring up also, and when I said concerns for others, my concern in particular are with many women who've been victims of sexual assault, sexual abuse. The New York Post ran a story last year that sex crimes soaring in New York City. We have tens of thousands of sex crimes each year that occur in New York State. And the reason I bring this up is this bill was actually enacted in December of last year out in Washington State. And there have been several instances, many have probably seen this in the news, many instances, but I want to focus on one particular story. It says sexual assault victims speak out against Washington's transgender bathroom policies. In particular, Gretchen Flores, a 47-year-old from Puyallup, Washington, said she was abused and it happened inside a locker room. Now, this is Ms. Flores. She's quoted saying, "There's no doubt in my mind that many, many people will be hurt with this kind of policy. The policies which went into effect December 26 grant individuals full access to bathrooms, locker rooms, and other gender-specific facilities in accordance with their chosen gender identity instead of their anatomical sex. But already Simon and other victims feel their stories have fallen on deaf ears, and they're being portrayed in the public as fearmongers." Now, she stated over and over again, women are told your abuse is not important. It's not important to fund. It's not important to protect. This is just one more way for us to know that our abuse doesn't matter, that we are not protected, Simon said, and she's added, "And now I'm a fearmonger because I'm speaking about it. I don't accept it. I'm not. I'm not crying that the sky is falling. This is actually happening, and it's not a pretend thing." She says, "I wish it was." She's not alone. There were other victims. But she went on to say, citing statistics that say that less than 1% of the American population is transgender, Flores asks, and these are her words, she says, "Why are the 99% having to change our whole way of doing things for less than 1%? Again, a real concern from a victim. Another victim, Kaylee Triller. She's a survivor, a rape survivor. And she says she believes that allowing people to use bathrooms that don't match their anatomy could lead to more instances of people being sexually assaulted. She says, "Is it ironic to no one that being progressive actually sets women's lib about a century back? What of my right to do my darndest to insist that the first time my daughter sees the adult male form, it will be because she's chosen it, not because it's forced upon her?" Now, again, there are many instances where many people will be affected on this, but I think she really put it very clearly and very succinctly when she said that. This is a bill that is going to affect so many others. I want you to picture this. I want you to picture a woman who is sexually abused or sexually assaulted. She goes to a Curves or the YMCA. She goes for a workout. She's done with her workout. She goes in the locker room. She feels safe. That's her safe place. That's a safe haven. She feels comfortable there. It's other women around her. She's still dealing with the sexual assault or the rape that occurred. She's still dealing with that. She looks across the locker room and she sees a man. Now, he may very well identify as a woman, but that's not what she's seeing. She's not seeing this. She's seeing a man across there. How is she supposed to feel? Is she still supposed to feel safe?
Why do you rise?
I'm wondering if my colleague will yield.
You know what I'd like to do is go ahead and finish, and if there is time back, I would absolutely.
Mr. Murray does not yield, Mr. Skoufis.
Not for the time being. But I want you to put yourself in that place of that female who's standing there and has to look across there and see a man, what she sees as a man. And I get it. I said this in the beginning. This is a complex, a very difficult situation. I understand that. And I understand that this person may be struggling with their gender identity. But that woman's not. And other women in there are not. They're not struggling with it. When they look across the room, they are seeing a man. And how do they feel when their 14-year-old daughter is with them? And as this woman said, she wants the first time that her daughter sees a man to be her choice, not someone else's. How are they supposed to feel? Why are we ignoring their feelings? And this is one of the many reasons. This is why I'm struggling with this so much, because I just feel like there are too many people being affected by this, and they feel that they don't have a say, and I think they should. So for that reason, and many others, I'll be voting against this bill, and I encourage my colleagues to do the same. Thank you.
Mr. Goodell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Will you yield, Mr. Godfrey? Sponsor yields.
Thank you, Mr. Godfrey. Looking at your bill and the definition of gender identity or expression, my first question is, does your definition encompass gender dysphoria, which is apparently considered as a recognized medical condition?
Yeah, you know, I haven't opened the bill on my little screen here, so I don't have the actual bill language, but whether the word is used in the bill or not, as far as I know, that it would apply to people to whom that term applies.
And so then am I correct on that if the definition of gender identity and expression includes gender dysphoria, that any discrimination based on gender dysphoria would likewise be precluded?
I would assume so.
And does that then also mean that gender dysphoria would no longer be considered a medical disability?
I would hesitate to answer that question because I'm not sure in what context the term appears, but whether something is your gender identity or expression doesn't necessarily have to mean that it is or isn't a medically defined condition.
The reason I'm asking is because back in January of this year, the Division of, the Human Rights Division of Human Rights, amended the regulations, and they make a distinction between gender identity and gender dysphoria, and they treat gender dysphoria as a disability, which then triggers all the provisions that we deal with on disabilities, like the Americans with Disabilities Act, the need for reasonable and necessary accommodations. And so my concern when I read this, and I agree with your initial assessment, my concern was that if this bill incorporates gender dysphoria, I think that we are inadvertently pulling out the rug from the disability determinations that are made by the Division of Human Rights and taking gender dysphoria out of that category. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, now that I've opened the bill, the word gender dysphoria does not appear in the language of the bill.
That's why I asked you whether you thought the language that is here included it.
Okay. I would say before I'm going to express an opinion as to whether something is or is not a medical condition, and if it is or isn't, you know, is there any relationship between being something where you are protected by this bill and whether that has the consequence of eliminating provision for accommodation by an employer? I'm afraid I don't see how that connection would be made, but I'm wary of expressing, you know, what might be thought of as a legal or legislative intent expression, because I really haven't thought of these words in that kind of context.
And I appreciate that. And of course, these are regulations from the Division of human rights are very recent. They've only been around for a few months. And it is those regulations that make the distinction between gender identity and gender dysphoria. And I'm just commenting on the fact that they define gender dysphoria as a medical condition. And I appreciate the fact that this may be the first time we've really kind of had this discussion on this issue. The existing discrimination language, as you know, that prohibits sex discrimination, and there are a number of judicial decisions that have asserted or taken a position that discrimination based on sex would also include discrimination on gender identity. Is it your belief that this legislation goes beyond those legal determinations?
Well, it is certainly correct that for several years now, the Federal Equal Employment Opportunities Commission has taken the position and prevailed on that position in court and elsewhere that gender identity discrimination is a kind of sex discrimination. And when the State Division of Human Rights adopted the regulations that you were quoting earlier, it was because they finally decided to adopt that same interpretation of our decades-old prohibition on sex discrimination. I would say what this bill does is create something, it's not a question of it being beyond that so much as being maybe parallel to it. It puts a specific reference to gender identity and expression in the human rights law. It's worth noting that this bill uses slightly different wording than the bill did last year, and that the regulations do because a lot of the advocates in the field felt that the wording in the bill before us now is somewhat clearer, although its meaning is not meant to be different from the meaning of the regulations.
And I appreciate that. My concern is this. As you know, our regulatory agencies only have the legal authority to adopt regulations within the scope of their statutory authority. An agency cannot regulate more in a subject matter than what the statute provides for. And so when the Division of Human Rights issued its regulations and specifically identified gender identity as a violation of the anti-sexual discrimination provisions, they did so based on a legal analysis that the existing law was broad enough to cover the field so that they could issue the regulation. If it's your position that this legislation is necessary because the existing law is not broad enough, doesn't that position undercut the efforts of the Division of Human Rights?
I understand what you're saying. I do not think the Division of Human Rights went beyond the law. I have, for a long, long time, believed that a proper interpretation of the term sex discrimination would, in fact, include gender identity, etc., discrimination. But years ago, when I decided to help draft and then introduce this bill, the thinking was that while I and others thought the law should be interpreted that way, it had not been, that interpretation had not been widely adopted. It now has been widely adopted, and here in New York, I strongly endorsed the regulations and wrote to the Division of Human Rights saying that I thought that their interpretation was sound. but the bill is still needed, A, in order to ensure that this protection is in statute and doesn't get undone by some future commissioner of the Division of Human Rights, and second of all, because I think transgender New Yorkers ought to have their protection specifically mentioned in statute.
Along those lines, as you know, there are certain exceptions from the current law as it relates to prohibiting sex discrimination, one of which is that any educational institution which establishes or maintains a policy of educating persons of one sex exclusively may admit students of only one sex. And as you know, New York has really a proud tradition of having some great all-women schools. I don't think we have any all-men schools anymore, but we used to. But even though schools are allowed to admit just women, as an example, they're still prohibited from discriminating against a student based on any of the other criteria: age, race, color, religion, national origin. And if this bill is enacted, one of those other criteria would be gender identity. So my question is, what does that mean if a school can discriminate based on sex but not gender identity?
I believe that under the current regulations and under this bill, if it is enacted, any institution that legally differentiates by sex would be required to make that differentiation based on gender identity and expression. So that, for example, let's say Barnard College, I believe that under this bill, if it is enacted and under the current regulations, that Barnard College is required to accept as a woman somebody who is transgendered from male to female.
Okay. Thank you for your clarification on the bill.
On the,
When the New York State courts first considered this, it was back in 1977, almost 40 years ago. And at that time, the court said that if you're discriminating against somebody based on their gender identity, it is a form of sex discrimination. And as the sponsor correctly noted, it's taken a long time for some of our regulations to embrace that in the regulations. But they can only embrace that concept and they can only regulate discrimination against gender identity if our current law is broad enough to prohibit that type of discrimination. If it's broad enough, we don't need this bill. If it's not broad enough, the existing regulations that prohibit gender identity discrimination, they are without a statutory basis and they're invalid. Now, the advantage of allowing the Human Rights Commission to regulate this is they have more flexibility to respond to unique situations. They can amend the regulations easier than we can amend laws. There's another important distinction. When the Division of Human Rights considers gender identity discrimination to be part of sex discrimination, it's then considered a subcategory of sex discrimination. And that's important because in society and in New York State, we recognize literally hundreds, or if not thousands, of distinctions between the sexes, and we say that's okay. So, for example, we say it's okay for a scholarship to apply to just women. That's okay. It doesn't violate sex discrimination laws. We say it's okay to have a college that admits only women or only men. We say it's okay to have sports teams that have only women and not men. And when we put gender identity or expression as a separate category, rather than a subcategory, we take all those distinctions and draw them into question. So while I appreciate the desire of the sponsor to eliminate gender identity as a basis of discrimination in those areas where we shouldn't have any of that type of discrimination, public housing or transportation or employment, where it's unrelated, we as legislators need to be sensitive to the fact that those areas are already regulated, and this opens up a whole new Pandora's box by treating it separate and distinct from sex discrimination, drawing into question all those other areas, sports, schools, scholarships, and everywhere else. So for that reason, I recommend against this bill. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Lopez.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Will you yield, Mr. Gottfried? Sponsor yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So just for clarification, and this is where I just need some guidance. So in the language of the bill, I guess there are a couple different phrases, and I just need your help with clarification. So transgendered means someone who has or is in the process of literally changing their gender. Is that correct?